Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to our weekly recap of the Friday sermon of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr Aziz. Today, Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr Aziz continued his sermon on the series of the Badri Sahaba or the Badri companions. And nowadays, he recently begun talking about the Khulafa or the successors of the Holy Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, starting with Hazrat Ali. And this is the fourth sermon in the series of Hazrat Ali's biography. And before Hazur started to talk about the biography of Hazrat Ali, continuing his series, Hazur talked about how, in light of the disorder that was started in the time of Hazrat Usman, and the disarray that began in the Muslim Ummah, he wrote that Hazur talked about what Hazrat Muslim Maud wrote, which was that in order to avoid such disorder, the Muslims need to not only hold tight and hold fast to the rope of Khilafat, but to the community, as well as keeping themselves well educated so that they do not fall into such disarray. Now, I'm here joined by our brothers Wajahat Ali Sahib and Abdur Rahim Jones Sahib. Now, Wajahat Bhai, we talked about, here Hazur talked about, holding on to Khilafat, holding on to the community, keeping yourself well educated. And one, means that Hazur talked about is that in today's day and age, we have MTA in which we can watch the programs of Hazur, we can watch his sermons live, and then we can also rewatch them so we can, fully grasp his sermon, the teachings that he's endowing us. And also he talked about, we talked about this week with Hazur that we could just see, Hazur also communicate with other, individual groups or through the virtual mulaqats or before the pandemic, through his meetings throughout the week. So we got to see not only what Hazur has for us through his sermons, but we also get to see what he's up to throughout the whole week. So can you touch upon what that means in your daily life and how we can utilize that as to avoid this disarray and disorder?
Absolutely. I try to think of it in terms of our ancestors and really anyone who used to be close to a Khalifa back in Qadian, back in Rabwa, even today in Islamabad and London. In today's khutbah, Hazur mentioned a quote, I believe it was from Hazrat Muslim Maud, that he was encouraging Ahmadis to come visit him over and over again, come to Qadian, have a relationship with me, have a relationship with the markas. In this time, it's not always easy to do that, but what we can do is we can use MTA. We see two kind of sides of Hazur. One is Hazur in the Friday sermon, and then there's also Hazur as he is every day. And we get to see such a beautiful personality and such a beautiful side of Hazur that we don't always get to see in the Friday sermon. And if we had never met with him, and if we are unable to go to Islamabad, we may never have actually known about this side. To build a relationship and to ensure that the fitna and the disorder that had arisen in the past does not happen again, we need to have a strong relationship with Hazur. We can do that these days through things like This Week with Hazur, through material coming out of Al-Hakam, through material coming out of Review of Religions as well.
You touched upon building that relationship with Hazur, and it's very essential that through that relationship with Khilafat, we are able to avoid the disarray by holding very close to the Jamaat, holding very close to Khilafat. Rahim Bhai, tell us about, what that means. How does that help us, or how does that help you? How can we, us three individuals and the other Khuddam who are hopefully watching, how can we avoid falling into such disarray or disorder through those means that Hazur has talked about today?
So I can't reiterate enough on Brother Wajahat in regards to, that personal connection that we make with Hazur every week. And, as often as material comes, we should be connected with that material. But there's another thing that which Hazur pointed out in his khutbah. And he said that we must be educated We must be well educated. How do we educate ourselves with this, brother? What I took from the Kuba is that from past mistakes can lead to our understanding of how we can deal with all our situations in the future, as well as the past successes. You have many righteous companions that Hazur talked about. A few, well, not many, but at least a good 5 righteous companions who both were thinking that they were doing good. But what prevailed? What prevailed was that divine institution of Caliphs. And that's one thing that I took from this, educating that say, let's not go against Caliphs. Let's make sure that we reiterate our and affirm our faith and affirm our allegiance that we made to Caliphs. So this thing that I learned through this Kuba was, let's not go against Caliphs. Let's nip every notion of it and kill it, as soon as possible.
Thank you, Reem Bhai. You talk about not going against Khilafat. Hazur talked about how the Battle of the Camel came about. He talked about how by this misunderstanding that was created by, all this disorder was actually created by these rebellions who were trying to, break apart the Muslim Ummah and the institution of Khilafat. But at the end of the day, Hazrat Ali prevailed because he held fast to Khilafat. His main ideal was to protect. I remember when Hazur talked about the main thing that Hazrat Ali wanted, and that was simple, and that was to protect the institution of Khilafat, protect the institution of Islam, and keep it intact in its pure form, and instead of it, going here and there and becoming disordered. But that was something very that touched me personally, because Islam as a religion, it is through Khilafat that it remains intact. Islam is perfect in itself, but to keep it intact within the people, Islam, through the institution of Khilafat, creates that, number one, unity between everybody, which Hazrat Ali wanted to establish. Wajaz Bhai, tell us about what Hazrat Ali was talking about, what Hazur mentioned that Hazrat Ali wanted instead of this war. We all know that Hazrat Ali was not trying to go to war. He wanted to create peace. He wanted to create unity. He wanted to create this sense of, keeping faith intact in its pure form so that we would not go astray in this order. So can you talk about how Hazrat Usman, or after Hazrat Usman's passing and the pledge that Hazrat Talha and Hazrat Zubair took at Hazrat Ali's hand? Tell us more about that. Can you expand on that for us?
Absolutely. What had happened was Hazrat Ali and Hazrat Talha and Hazrat Zubair had performed a bayat on a condition. And that condition was something that they felt very passionate about, that Hazrat Ali would find the killers of Hazrat Usman and avenge his death. When they saw that Hazrat Ali's focus is somewhere slightly different, and Hazrat Ali's focus had shifted to focusing on the unity, his idea was, let's bring everyone back together, and when everyone is back together, the Hukuma, the government, will decide what to do with the killers of Hazrat Usman. We will get justice. This was Hazrat Ali's perspective. Hazrat Talha and Hazrat Zubair perhaps did not see that. Perhaps what they saw was Hazrat Ali is not living up to the condition upon which we had done bayt. That's when they went to Hazrat Aisha and said, hey, things are not going the way we expected it, or they're not going perhaps as fast as we expected it. They went to Basra, and from there things started to escalate. But there were multiple meetings between Hazrat Aisha and Hazrat Ali. Hazrat Ali continued to implore them to seek reason, to see that what he's doing is not avoiding this. He is trying to bring everybody back together first, and he will deal with this. Unfortunately, it was the plan of the Munafiqeen and those killers of Hazrat Usman that led to disarray and led to disorder.
And further led to the fight that broke out between these two forces and these armies. And even though that we saw, like as Hazur explained, we saw that despite the fact that there was a war, there was a battle, Hazrat Hazrat Ali ensured that he was there to reconcile, he was there to create peace, and even when the war started, which Hazrat Talha and Hazrat Zubair were not a part of, because even before the talks, ended in peace, in result of that, those two were killed, and they were martyred and accepted by Allah. They would return to their creator. And unfortunately, the battle had then taken place. But at the same time, Hazrat Ali ensured the safety of Hazrat Aisha. He wanted to make sure that the war ended as soon as possible, or the battle ended as soon as possible. And by doing so, he had the legs of the camels or the feet of the camels cut down so that the camel wouldn't move, and then the battle will end. But making sure at the same time that Hazrat Aisha was safe. And then he took Hazrat Aisha back home. He escorted her back home in a safe manner, protecting her throughout the whole way. Now, Rahim Bhai, can you tell us about how the virtue here that we see in Hazrat Ali, that he wanted to create, not only did he want to create peace, but he ended things in a peaceful manner, even though they did come into the state of war. Can you talk about his desire to keep peace, desire to instill peace not only between him and Hazrat Aisha, but him for the entire ummah in itself?
And this of course, this is very important, because we all knew that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, through previous kubas, that the Prophet was sending Hazrat Ali in order to be a judge. So we knew of his just affairs. We knew how he would deal with this. And this unfortunate situation landed in the lap of Hazrat Ali, right? So, it was detrimental for the ummah. But this was, to me, it was another virtue, of what we received through Hazrat Ali, in the way he dealt with this. He dealt with this so that matters would be resolved in just the most decent manner. And it's like, unlike what other leaders, people who commit treason, we see when someone commits treason in the United States, they're like punished by death. So this is a so-called act of treason. So and this is not taken lightly in regards to even in our present time. So I just see this virtue being the way he ended the battle, the way he dealt with the people, even when he heard that Hazrat was it Talha was murdered. He told the guy, man, the Prophet said the killer will be in the hellfire. So it's just like, it was just amazing how he dealt with the situation, and the remembrance that he tied to what the Prophet had said, and how he went about this, with such, cautiousness.
We see that nowadays, especially, there's a lot of issues rising through the social media usage of the word present Caliph of Islam. And by the grace of Allah, our Khudam Ahmadiyya team is promoting true caliphate and the Caliph of the Messiah, because that's what Islam essentially needs today. And in order to uphold the truth of Khilafat, what did the Khulafa of the past and the Khulafa of the present all have done, that one main essential task of what the Khalifa of the time is supposed to, serve as, and that was to create peace after uncertainty or disarray. And even despite all the disarray, Hazrat Ali focused on keeping peace, just as our President Hazur continues to keep peace in today's day and age, where people are throwing allegations at Islam, people are throwing allegations at, Ahmadiyyat, people are trying to bring down our community, people are trying to bring down our Khilafat. But by the grace of Allah, our Khilafat is so strong and it is based on the precepts of prophethood, as the Holy Quran has dictated for us. And before I get to the end of this presentation or this recap, I want to bring the attention of our brothers to what Hazur talked about in the end of his sermon today about Algeria and Pakistan. Now, these countries, they're raising a lot of persecution against our members, to the extent where a few of our members were sentenced to time in prison. And by the grace of Allah, Hazrat has praised that government because they have come to their senses and they have, given them freedom from that imprisonment or that verdict. Now, if you look at the second battle that Hazrat talked about today in his sermon, I want to kind of tie that in because Hazrat Ali had to deal with the same thing. This is not just a new era it's the same Islamic era that is facing the same opposition, even in the 600s and even today in the 2000s. People are trying to arrest our Algerians. People are trying to bring down our Khilafat. Unfortunately, Hazrat Ali also faced more opposition, not just in the Battle of the Camel, but even after the Battle of the Camel. There's the Battle of Siffin, where the same forces stirred up more trouble, and there was a force led by Hazrat Amir Muawiyah, the son of Abu Sufyan, who later accepted Islam at the hands of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They stirred up his forces against Hazrat Ali between Syria and Iraq. And there were, I think Rahim Saab mentioned it, that there were judges on both parties who were appointed to solve the issue at hand, which was the Khilafat of Hazrat Ali. If Rahim Saab, can you tell us about how the rebels, tried time after time to bring down the Khilafat of Hazrat Ali through Battle of Camel, Battle of Siffin? Can you tell us the importance of the need for leadership against, their lack of need for leadership, as they claim?
So we do notice that out of all the attempts that they made in order to destroy the Caliphate, in order to, create disorder, that this unfortunate situation had happened. These people were known as the Khawarij at the time. And these people, Hazur said that they basically said there was no use for leadership. Now that's the scary part, right? The scary part that says these guys basically just abandoned leadership whatsoever, and now who is going to lead? If without any use in leadership, where will we be? We already know what the Muslim world is facing. Hazur has prayed for these people. Hazur has even, in regards to them, when they did a little something good, he said, may Allah reward them for, doing just that. But we know that we have leadership, right? And this is something that I never want to be separated from again in my life. I have nothing else to say but that I do not wish, to be separated from this, because without it, I wouldn't know how to deal with other Muslims, to be honest, honestly. Without Khilafat Ahmadiyyah, I would not know how to deal with other Muslims, just in regards that the people that they were unaware how to deal with the people of their time in that situation during Hazrat Ali,
Jazakallah. This Khilafat, as you talked about, like, what will we do without this Khilafat in terms of opposition? In light of that opposition, Wajad Bhai, before briefly, if you can talk about the patience of Hazrat Ali, and then talk about, in light of that same patience, how patient our present Hazur is even, but more focusing on Hazrat Ali in light of the khutbah, as Hazur talked about how Hazrat Ali, strove for simply peace. He remained patient, but he was also forced into a position where he had to end up fighting those rebels. And can you expound on the focus of Hazrat Ali during those troubled times?
Absolutely. The patience of Hazrat Ali can be seen through the episode of where he sent his representatives, and he agreed to the demands of the rebels and Amir Muawiyah that, okay, let's send representatives. Hazrat Ali said, look, base your decision upon the Holy Quran. Decide how we should proceed on the Holy Quran itself. I will abide by the injunctions of the Holy Quran. So ultimately, he's placing his trust in Allah. He sends his representative. Amir Mawiyah also sends his representative. Ultimately, and Hazur noted in his khutbah that this is going to be another subject of discussion later. But ultimately, the two representatives, when they had met, they determined that both Hazrat Ali and Amir Mawiyah should be stripped of their leadership. This was not the question. This was not the task that Hazrat Ali had put forward. And even further, he said that is not in line with the Holy Quran. Once a Khalifa is elected, you can't just say, no, you're not going to be Khalifa anymore. A similar situation had happened during the time of Khalifa Masih Awwal of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And yet, despite this, Hazrat Ali was looking for ways of peace. He was looking for ways to avoid war. When he was speaking to Hazrat Zubair and Hazrat Talha, he said, am I not your brother? Was I not with you? All these companions, Amir Mawiyah, so many people were his brothers. War was the absolute last thing that he wanted. It was only because of the Munafiqeen who continued to stir disorder. And Hazur said earlier that one of the representatives, it seemed as if he had gotten caught up in some of their guile, if you will. And again, Hazur said he'll expound on that, inshallah, in the future. But despite all of this, Hazrat Ali continued to find routes for peace. And today, we can take the example of the Charlie Hebdo cartoons. The leadership of the rest of the Ummah, whether they be Sunnis, whether they be Shias, is in such disarray. How many people, how many of their leaders were calling for violence? How many of their leaders were calling for, again, violence, right? There's nothing else, other way I can put it. And what happened? French society, again, this year saw that violence. They saw the result of a lack of leadership in the Muslim world. Whereas Hazur, he said we need to deal with the situation with patience. When there are detractors, when there are people who are attacking the character of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and being disrespectful to him, you don't attack them. You don't commit violence. You seek a peaceful route. And that peaceful route is to show the world the beauty of the Holy Prophet ﷺ and the beautiful aspects of his personality. You engage in dialogue with them. And Hazur is saying this without patience. He himself is one of the great lovers of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. It hurts him just as it hurts anybody else in the Muslim Ummah.
It hurts him even more because he's the greatest lover of the Holy Prophet alive today. And Vajat, you make a very good point, and it goes back to what Hazur initiated his khutbah, or he started his khutbah on the basis of educating yourself, as Rahim Bhai expounded on, by looking at the examples of the virtues and the mistakes of the past, as well as holding on to the community, holding on to Khilafat. And I think our Khuddam, as Khuddam, we have to realize that by holding on to Khilafat, by holding on to the community, the Jamaat, we need to establish that, or kind of sink into that unity, that peace and security that Khilafat provides us with, and educate ourselves by listening to his khutbah, and also educating ourselves about Khalifatul Masih, so that we can essentially build that relationship with him by means of his khutbahs, or the sermons, or the various programs that are provided by MTA. And I would urge my Khuddam brothers to also, continuously write to Hazur, because through those letters, that's when Hazur really gets to know you. And through MTA, we get to know him, but then he gets to know us through those letters. Now, I would like to end our recap of the sermon with this clip of Hazur's sermon, in which he appeals to the members of the Jamaat in regards to praying for the safety and security of our members of the Jamaat in Algeria and in Pakistan. With that, on that note, I would like to say Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for viewing. And I hope